Eli Carter's boots crunched through the thick, wet leaves of the forest floor. The moon hung high, casting pale light over the dense trees that stood like silent sentinels. Eli was used to nights like this, hunting down whispers of the supernatural that rattled the fragile edges of reality. He was an investigator of the unknown, a monster hunter. But tonight, the whispers had led him to a town with an unsettling history. For the past month, families in a small community had been reporting disappearances. It started with a local teenage girl, Sarah Weller, vanishing without a trace. No one had seen or heard from her for days. But what made it stranger was that Sarah wasn't the first. Over the last decade, the town had seen more than a dozen disappearances, each one tied to a pattern that no one could explain. They seemed to disappear into thin air, leaving behind only confusion and a deep sense of dread. Eli had been called in by an old friend, Sheriff Dan Hawkins, who had heard of his work in solving similar cases across the country. The sheriff's voice had been filled with tension when he reached out. "Eli, we need your help. The town, there's something wrong here. People are vanishing, and I can't explain it. I'm afraid whatever this is, it's going to happen again. Soon." Eli's instincts told him that this wasn't a typical missing persons case. He'd faced down demons, vengeful spirits, and creatures from nightmares, but something about the way Hawkins spoke hinted at something darker than usual. The sheriff had told him to meet at the old church on the outskirts of town at midnight. There, Eli would learn more about what he was up against. As he trudged through the woods, a chill wind picked up, rustling the branches overhead. The forest seemed to breathe with a life of its own, and Eli couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and he instinctively reached for the silver blade hidden beneath his jacket. The town had a dark secret, something that had been whispered about for generations but never confirmed. People called it the Hollows, an area deep in the woods where those who vanished were said to be drawn. A place that no one dared enter after dark. Some said it was cursed, others claimed it was haunted by the souls of the missing, but no one had ever returned to tell the tale. Eli had heard the legends, of course, but legends never bothered him. He believed in the real dangers, creatures that could slip between worlds, curses tied to the land, and spirits too vengeful to rest. It was why he did what he did. But as the trees began to thin out and the church came into view, he couldn't help but feel that the legends about the Hollows were about to become much more than just stories. The church was an old, decaying building, its stone walls cracked and weathered by time. Eli could see the faint flicker of light coming from inside, signaling the sheriff's presence. He quickened his pace, eager to learn more and maybe put an end to whatever was stalking this town. As he stepped onto the porch, he noticed something strange, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper carried by the wind. It was a woman's voice, too distant to make out the words but heavy with desperation. It came from the forest. Then, as if on cue, the wind died down, and the forest fell into an eerie silence. Eli glanced over his shoulder, instinctively scanning the dark woods. The door to the church creaked open, and Eli stepped inside, greeted by the dim light of a single candle flickering on the altar. Sheriff Hawkins stood near the front, his face grim, his uniform wrinkled with exhaustion. "You made it," Hawkins said, his voice low. "I'm glad you're here, Eli. But I'm afraid this is bigger than I thought. Sarah Weller. I think she's still out there, And something else is hunting her. Eli raised an eyebrow. Something else? What are we dealing with here? Hawkins stepped forward, his hands shaking slightly as he handed Eli an old, weathered journal. This belonged to my father, he said. He was the sheriff before me. He used to warn me about the things that lived in the hollows. I never believed him, not until now. Eli opened the journal, flipping through pages filled with strange symbols and unsettling drawings, sketches of a shadowy figure, half human, half something else. A creature with hollow eyes, its form distorted and impossible to understand. There's something in these woods, Hawkins continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Something that takes people. They vanish, like Sarah did, and no one ever sees them again. But there's a pattern to it. Every 10 years it happens. I thought it was just an old man's ramblings, until I saw what we found by Sarah's house. Eli looked up sharply. What did you find? Hawkins hesitated, then motioned to a table at the side of the room. On it lay a piece of cloth, torn, weathered, and covered in dark, dried stains. It was found near Sarah's bedroom window, the sheriff said. It's part of an old ritual. My father said something about the Hollow Man. He believed it was a curse, something that feeds on fear, drawing people into the woods, trapping them there for eternity. Eli stood up, his mind racing. The pieces were falling into place. He had heard of similar stories before, dark entities that fed on fear and isolation, luring victims into their lairs. But this one was different. It felt older, more powerful. And it wasn't just taking people, it was feeding off of them. We need to go to the hollows, Eli said, his voice steady but his heart pounding. Tonight. Sheriff Hawkins nodded, his face pale. I was hoping you'd say that. As they made their way out of the church and into the forest, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. Something that had been waiting, just beyond the veil of the trees. And for the first time in a long while, Eli wasn't sure if they would make it out alive. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows across the forest as Eli and Sheriff Hawkins trudged deeper into the woods. The air had grown colder, and with each step, the oppressive silence around them seemed to grow heavier. The usual sounds of the forest, rustling leaves, the calls of distant animals, had all faded away. In their place was the unsettling stillness of a place untouched by time, or perhaps even by reality. Eli's instincts were on high alert. Something about the way the trees loomed over them, their twisted branches reaching like gnarled hands, made the hairs on his neck stand up. He had faced horrors before, but this felt different. The legend of the Hollow Man was one he'd heard whispered in the dark corners of the country, an urban legend that only the bravest, or the most foolish, dared to investigate. Your father believed this creature existed? Eli asked, his voice breaking the unnatural silence as they walked side by side. Hawkins nodded grimly, his eyes darting nervously around. Yeah, but no one else did. Not until recently. My father, he had this journal, and it was filled with notes about the Hollow Man. But I didn't understand. Not until I saw Sarah's house and that thing in the woods. Thing? Eli asked, his eyes narrowing. A shape, Hawkins said, his voice shaky. Something watching her. I don't know how to explain it, but I saw it. out of the corner of my eye, just standing there, half shrouded in shadow. It wasn't human, but it looked like it was made of the forest itself, like it belonged here. Eli slowed his pace, studying Hawkins closely. You saw it? Hawkins nodded again, swallowing hard. Yeah, but when I blinked it was gone. I tried to go back, but there was nothing. Just trees. Eli's heart thudded heavily in his chest. The forest had a way of playing tricks on the mind, but Hawkins wasn't the type to be easily spooked. And if the sheriff had seen something, it was real. They continued through the woods, the weight of the night settling on them like a thick fog. The path seemed to twist and turn in impossible ways, making Eli question how they were still moving forward. But then, in the distance, a shape emerged from the darkness, a small clearing, the trees parting like the jaws of some massive beast. At the center of the clearing was a circle of stones, worn and weathered by the ages, like an ancient altar. Eli's breath caught in his throat. The air in the clearing was thick with an unnatural stillness, and a faint, almost imperceptible hum vibrated through the ground. Something ancient, something powerful, had been here long before they arrived. This is it, Hawkins whispered, his voice barely audible, as if speaking too loudly might disturb whatever force resided here. Eli's eyes scanned the clearing. The stones were arranged in a perfect circle, but they looked almost alive, as if they were growing from the earth itself, entwined with roots and vines. The hum seemed to resonate from the stones, pulling at something deep within him, stirring a sense of dread he couldn't shake. Eli stepped forward, his boots crunching softly on the forest floor. "What is this place?" he muttered to himself, unsure if he was asking Hawkins or the woods themselves. Hawkins swallowed hard. "My father called it the Circle of the Hollow Man. He believed it was a gateway, a place where the creature could cross from one world to another. A place where it could reach into our world and feed." "Feed?" Eli repeated. "On what?" "On fear," Hawkins said, his voice low, haunted. "It draws people here, takes them. They vanish without a trace, but it's not just their bodies that disappear. Their fear, their terror, that's what it feeds on. It devours the soul." Eli's mind raced. This wasn't just a creature. It was a force of nature, something tied to the land itself. It fed on fear, drawing its victims into the woods, trapping them in an endless cycle of dread. Sarah Weller, she hadn't just vanished. She had been taken. Before Eli could speak again, a sudden, chilling whisper floated through the air. It wasn't from Hawkins. It wasn't from anything human. Eli froze. The whisper wasn't words. It was a sound, a low, guttural hum that seemed to vibrate in his chest, in his very bones. His breath caught in his throat. And then he heard it. A laugh. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. A low, cracked sound that echoed from the darkness beyond the clearing, like the rustling of dry leaves in the wind, too close. It was followed by the faintest creak, like the sound of something unnatural shifting in the shadows. Eli's eyes snapped to Hawkins, who was staring into the darkness with wide, fearful eyes. "Did you hear that?" Hawkins whispered, his voice trembling. "I did," Eli said, his heart pounding. He reached for his gun, his fingers brushing the cold steel of the handle. But something told him that a gun wouldn't stop whatever this was. And then, The whispering grew louder. Eli's grip on his gun tightened as he stepped forward, his eyes scanning the trees, the shadows. He could feel it now. Something was in the clearing with them. But when he turned, all he saw was the empty space between the stones. Then, in an instant, a shape emerged from the darkness. It was tall, towering, and covered in shadows that seemed to cling to its form like a shroud. Its face was hollow, an empty void that consumed the light around it. No eyes, no mouth, no features, just darkness. Eli's blood ran cold. The creature was real. The Hollow Man, Hawkins whispered, stepping back, his voice a mix of fear and disbelief. It's here. The creature did not move at first. It just stood there, its form flickering in and out of existence like a mirage. And then, slowly, it began to move toward them. Eli didn't hesitate. He drew his silver blade from its sheath and took a step forward, his feet heavy against the ground. "Stay back, Hawkins," he warned. "Get to the trees. Now." But Hawkins didn't move. His eyes were locked on the creature, his body frozen in place. The Hollow Man took another step forward, its hollow form growing larger, swallowing the air around it. The ground beneath them seemed to tremble as if the forest itself was alive, reacting to the creature's presence. Eli's heart raced. He knew what he had to do. The creature was drawing closer. And it was hungry. The Hollow Man moved like smoke, its shape warping and shifting with every step. It was taller than a man, easily 9 feet, its dark, formless silhouette looming over them like a nightmare made flesh. As it took another step forward, the air around it seemed to warp and twist, like the very fabric of reality was being torn apart by its presence. Eli's heart thundered in his chest as he held his ground, the silver blade in his hand gleaming faintly in the moonlight. He could feel the weight of the creature's gaze. Though it had no eyes, he was certain it was aware of him, aware of his fear. Fear, it thrived on it, fed off of it. That was the curse of the Hollow Man. "Hawkins!" Eli barked, his voice sharp and urgent. "Get the hell out of here! Now!" Sheriff Hawkins was paralyzed. His feet were rooted to the ground, his eyes wide with terror, staring into the abyss of the creature's empty face. His body trembled, caught in the grip of primal fear. Eli lunged forward, grabbing Hawkins by the shoulder and yanking him backward, breaking his trance. The force of the pull broke Hawkins' frozen stupor, and he staggered back with a sharp gasp, blinking rapidly as if waking from a nightmare. "Move!" Eli shouted again, pushing the sheriff toward the trees. But Hawkins hesitated. "We can't. It's too powerful. We can't outrun it." Eli's mind raced. He had faced demons, ghosts, and worse, but nothing like this. Nothing that could freeze a man with just its presence. The Hollow Man wasn't just a creature. It was fear made flesh. It didn't need to chase them. It only needed to make them believe they couldn't escape. "We don't run," Eli said, his voice grim. "We fight." But even as he spoke, he felt a wave of dread wash over him. The creature was drawing closer, its form flickering, ever-changing. It seemed to grow stronger with each breath, like it was feeding on the fear that was building in the pit of his stomach. Then, from the depths of the forest, another sound broke the silence. A low, muffled cry, a woman's scream, echoed through the trees. It was distant, but unmistakable. The voice was full of terror, and it pierced the stillness like a knife. Eli's blood ran cold. "Hawkins," he said quietly. "That's Sarah." Sheriff Hawkins' face drained of color. His lips parted, but no words came out. He was staring at Eli, as if trying to understand what was happening. She's still alive?" he whispered, his voice barely a breath. "I don't know," Eli said, his eyes scanning the forest. The scream had come from somewhere deeper in the woods. Somewhere close to the Hollow Man's lair. Eli knew what he had to do. The creature wasn't just taking people, it was keeping them. It was feeding on them, keeping them trapped in a nightmare. The only way to stop it was to face it head-on, to confront the terror that it caused. But first, they had to get to Sarah. "Stay close," Eli ordered, his voice low and steady. "We have to move fast. We don't have much time." Eli turned and began to push through the trees, his footsteps light but purposeful. Hawkins followed, albeit hesitantly, his hand gripping the flashlight he had brought. The beam cut through the darkness, but the trees seemed to swallow the light, making it feel as though the forest itself was trying to keep them from moving forward. The air felt thick, oppressive, as though the woods were alive and watching. Every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves made Eli's heart skip a beat. They were getting closer to the source of the scream, but something else was lurking in the darkness, a presence that was closing in on them. And it wasn't just the Hollow Man. They emerged into another clearing. The moonlight illuminated the scene before them, casting everything in a sickly, pale glow. In the center of the clearing was Sarah, kneeling on the ground, her head bowed, her hair matted and tangled with twigs and dirt. She was shaking, her body trembling, but not from the cold. And standing over her, its form even more solid than before, was the Hollow Man. The creature was no longer a wisp of shadow. It had become a massive, towering figure. Its form had taken shape, an almost human-like body made entirely of black tendrils, vines, and branches that twisted and curled like the roots of a tree. Its hollow face loomed above Sarah, an empty void that seemed to suck the very light from the air around it. It was feeding on her fear. Eli's stomach churned as he took a step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the moment of truth. "We're not leaving without her," Eli said, his voice firm, filled with the kind of resolve that had gotten him through countless fights with creatures far worse than this. Sheriff Hawkins, still trembling but now resolute, nodded. "How do we stop it?" Eli glanced around, looking for any sign of weakness, but the creature was too powerful, too deeply rooted in the forest. It was one with the land, as his father's journal had suggested. The only way to sever that bond was to draw it out, to force it into the open. He turned back to Hawkins. "We need to separate it from her. If we can't banish it, we can at least drive it away." Hawkins nodded again, his hand gripping the flashlight tightly, his knuckles white. Eli gripped the silver blade in his hand, a bead of sweat running down his temple. He didn't know if the blade would work on the creature. It wasn't like any monster he'd faced before. But it was all he had. Taking a deep breath, Eli stepped into the clearing, his eyes locked on the Hollow Man. Its hollow face tilted toward him, and for a moment, he thought he saw something, a faint flicker of recognition. It was aware of him. "You don't belong here," Eli called, his voice steady. "Leave her alone!" The hollow man's form seemed to pulse, rippling like water disturbed by a stone. It let out a low, rumbling sound, like the growl of some ancient beast, and then it moved. The air crackled with energy as the creature lunged toward him. Eli didn't hesitate. He dove forward, slashing the silver blade through the air. The moment it made contact, the creature let out a screeching sound, like metal scraping against stone, its form recoiling, momentarily shaken. It wasn't enough to defeat it, but it was enough to buy them time. "Sarah!" Eli shouted. "Get up! Run!" The girl didn't move, her eyes still locked on the creature, her face drained of color. She was trapped, paralyzed by fear. The hollow man hissed, its tendrils reaching out toward Eli. Hawkins yelled, "Eli, move!" But it was too late. The creature's tendrils lashed out with terrifying speed, and Eli felt the cold, crushing grip of its power. The darkness enveloped him, pulling him into its void. And then, everything went black. Eli's body was weightless, suspended in darkness. It was as if he was falling, or floating, he couldn't tell. The air around him felt thick, suffocating, and an oppressive silence wrapped him like a shroud. His chest tightened, and for a moment, he thought he might suffocate. He gasped, but no air came. The darkness was all-encompassing, as if it had swallowed him whole. Then, a cold hand closed around his wrist. Eli snapped his eyes open. He wasn't alone. The hollow man stood before him, its tendrils weaving through the air, its hollow form stretching into a vast, empty sky of shadow. It was no longer just a figure. It had become the very space around him, a presence that filled the void. Its shape flickered and twisted, as though reality itself was warping in its wake. The darkness was its domain, and Eli was its prisoner. "You cannot escape." The voice came from everywhere. It wasn't a voice at all. It was a feeling, a pressure in his mind, like the crushing weight of the world bearing down on him. It felt cold, ancient, and utterly devoid of mercy. Eli's breath came in sharp, panicked gasps. His grip on the silver blade was gone. His fingers had no strength to hold it. The creature's tendrils tightened around his body, pulling him closer, but he couldn't move. The fear, it was suffocating him, paralyzing him. "I have watched you, and I have waited for you," the hollow man's voice continued. "All things are drawn to me, in the end. Those who fear become part of me." Eli's chest constricted as the creature's words invaded his mind, feeding on his terror. He could feel it now. The creature wasn't just drawing from his fear. It was merging with it, entwining its existence with his own, using his panic to grow stronger. He fought to remain calm, but the tendrils of darkness seemed to burrow into his skin, into his soul, digging deep. His eyes darted around, searching for any escape. His heart raced in a blind panic, and yet, amidst the overwhelming fear, something in him snapped. A memory. A sense of purpose. He wasn't just anyone. He was a hunter, a man who had stared death in the face countless times. He had to fight. This wasn't just about him. This was about Sarah, about everyone this thing had taken. Eli's voice broke through the suffocating darkness. "I'm not afraid of you." The hollow man's laughter filled the void, low, distorted, and chilling. It vibrated through Eli's bones, echoing in his skull. "You think you can resist me?" it crooned, its form flickering closer. "You are mine, just like the others before you. There is no escape from the hollow. Fear is a part of you. It is who you are now." Eli clenched his fists, his mind struggling to break free of the grip the creature had on him. He could feel his muscles tensing as the tendrils began to pull tighter, squeezing the air from his lungs. The hollow man fed on fear, yes, but Eli had been through worse. He had faced hell itself, both literal and figurative. The difference was that he never let fear control him. He wasn't going to let this thing win. He wasn't going to let it take Sarah. "I'm not yours to claim," Eli grunted, his voice low but filled with defiance. "I chose to face you, and I will kill you." The hollow man's form flickered again, its tendrils shuddering, its twisted limbs drawing closer to Eli's chest. The laughter died down for a moment, and in its place came a low, threatening growl. "Kill me? You cannot kill that which is eternal. I am the darkness in your heart. I am the fear that you carry, the shadow in your soul. You cannot fight me because I am a part of you." Eli's mind screamed in protest, pushing against the creature's whispers. He had faced monsters that took on many forms, ghosts, demons, and even things that were beyond human comprehension. They all had one thing in common: they fed on fear. But they were not fear itself. And that was where they all failed. He had learned long ago that fear didn't control him. It was a tool he could wield. In a desperate surge of willpower, Eli pushed against the tendrils wrapping around him. His fingers tingled, and he could feel the silver blade materialize in his hand once more, though it wasn't in his grasp. It was a force of will, a piece of his determination, of his refusal to be consumed. The moment the blade materialized, it cut through the darkness like a burst of light in a storm. With a swift, determined motion, Eli brought the blade down, cutting through the darkness. There was a sound, like the tearing of fabric, as the hollow man shrieked in agony. The creature recoiled, its form shuddering as it tried to pull away from the silver. The tendrils loosened, and Eli gasped, pulling in a lungful of air. The blade in his hand glowed bright, casting harsh, blinding light across the dark expanse. "You cannot sever what is eternal," the hollow man hissed, its form shrinking, flickering, dissolving into a cloud of shifting shadows. But Eli didn't stop. He knew this wasn't over. "You're wrong," Eli muttered under his breath. "I am going to end you." With the blade in hand, he slashed again, cutting through the air like a knife through silk. The hollow man's form trembled, crackling as the light from the blade grew brighter. It screamed, its hollow face distorting in agony. "You think you have won?" the creature rasped, its voice thin and brittle now, full of rage. "You cannot destroy me. I am the forest, the land itself. I am the fear in every heart, the darkness in every soul." But Eli was no longer listening. His mind was clear, focused. He had been through too much to let something like this control him. The hollow man's voice was beginning to fade, its form splintering, and for the first time since he had arrived in this godforsaken place, Eli felt a flicker of hope. Suddenly, a scream cut through the air, a terrible, high-pitched wail, the sound of a woman's voice, faint but unmistakable. It was Sarah. Eli's heart skipped a beat. He turned to see the girl, her body still trembling but now standing, her face pale with fear but alive. Her eyes locked with Eli's, and she stumbled toward him, her arms reaching out in desperate relief. "Sarah! Go!" Eli shouted, his voice filled with urgency. "Run! Get out of here!" But Sarah didn't move. Her eyes were wide with terror, and she backed away from Eli, her expression one of shock and horror. "No. No. It's not over," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You don't understand. It's not finished." Before Eli could react, the darkness seemed to surge around her, and she let out a scream of terror as the hollow man's form began to reassemble, taking shape once more, stronger than before. It wasn't over. Eli's blood ran cold as the hollow man's form reappeared, its shape warping out of the air like a malignant shadow coiling back together. The light from Eli's blade flickered, but it was not enough to banish the creature entirely. Its form, black as pitch, twisted and undulated with an unnatural fluidity, like smoke coiling in and out of shape. Every crackle of the darkness sent a fresh jolt of dread into his bones. Sarah stood frozen, her face ashen, her eyes wide with horror. She had tried to escape, but the hollow man was pulling her back, drawing her into its grasp. The fear was palpable in the air now, suffocating, clinging to everything. "Sarah, move!" Eli screamed, panic clawing at his chest. He couldn't let her fall into it. He couldn't let the hollow man take her like it had taken so many before. But she didn't move. Her feet were planted to the ground, her hands trembling at her sides, as if some invisible force was holding her in place. The hollow man's tendrils snaked toward her, creeping like dark vines, wrapping around her legs, pulling her back toward the center of the clearing. Eli's heart slammed in his chest. He couldn't lose her, not now. He couldn't fail her, just as he had failed so many others. The blade in his hand pulsed with energy, but it felt distant. The creature was too strong, its dark form feeding on everything around them, on the fear, on the hopelessness. "No!" Eli shouted again, his voice rising with desperation. The creature's hollow face swirled, twisting into a grotesque parody of a smile. A jagged, empty grin that stretched wide, impossible, as if mocking him. It spoke, but the words were like a poison, crawling into his mind. "She is mine now. She will stay with me, just as you will, Eli. You cannot fight what is a part of you. All of you are drawn to me, whether you fight or surrender. You too are bound to me, bound to fear." Eli's blood burned. Fear, that's what the hollow man wanted, what it fed on. It didn't just consume the body, it consumed the soul. And the longer they stayed, the harder it would be to escape. "No. You're wrong," Eli hissed, taking a step forward, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of anything you can do." He thrust the blade forward, its silver edge gleaming bright, and with every ounce of strength, he slashed through the darkness again. The hollow man shrieked, its form writhing, but the tendrils that had held Sarah began to unravel, breaking apart with the force of the strike. For a moment, it seemed to weaken. The oppressive air lifted just slightly, the pressure in Eli's chest loosening. But it wasn't enough. The creature's form twisted violently, becoming a churning mass of blackness, like a storm ready to burst. It seemed to grow larger, its power pulling at the very fabric of reality. trying to swallow them whole. The shadows around them thickened, pulling in, tightening, as if the forest itself was closing in around them. "You think you can stop me?" the hollow man rasped, its voice sharp and brittle, full of malice. "I am the fear that lives in the heart of all things. You are nothing but another flicker of light in my eternal darkness." The ground beneath Eli's feet cracked and splintered, the earth shifting as though responding to the creature's rage. His vision blurred as shadows began to close in on all sides, the trees around them becoming blacker, more twisted. The world was folding, warping as the hollow man's influence spread, drawing them deeper into its grasp. And then, the realization hit him. Eli's eyes widened as he watched Sarah's trembling form, her face pale with fear. She wasn't just a victim, she was the key. The creature had been feeding on her fear, but she had been drawn into something darker. Her soul had been tethered to the hollow man's power. It wasn't just Sarah. It was everyone. Everyone who had vanished. They were all connected to this thing, bound in a never-ending cycle of terror and loss. The hollow man wasn't just a creature, it was a curse, an ancient force tied to the land. And it would never stop until every soul was claimed. "Sarah!" Eli called, forcing himself to look past the creature, to the girl trapped in its grasp. She didn't respond. She couldn't. A new plan formed in Eli's mind, one born of pure desperation. He was the hunter. He had faced worse than this. And if there was one thing he had learned, it was that monsters like this were never truly invincible. Eli's voice dropped to a low growl, his words sharp and commanding. "Sarah, listen to me. You have to fight. You have to feel your fear, and then you have to let it go." Her eyes flickered toward him. There was a spark of recognition in her gaze, hope. "Feel it," Eli repeated, his voice steady. "The fear doesn't control you. You can break free. Just let it go." The hollow man hissed in anger, its tendrils snapping like whips, trying to silence Eli, to pull Sarah back under its sway. The creature's form grew darker, more solid, like an avalanche of darkness about to consume them all. But Sarah, trembling, closed her eyes. And for the first time since Eli had arrived, she let go. A brilliant, blinding light exploded around her, flaring in every direction, radiating from deep inside her chest. The tendrils of the hollow man recoiled, shrieking in agony as the light burned through the darkness. It was pure, unfiltered light, a burst of life that filled the clearing and shattered the creature's grip on the land. Eli shielded his eyes as the light enveloped everything, but he didn't look away. This was it. This was their chance. The hollow man's form screamed, contorting and thrashing as the light tore at it, unraveling its shape. It lashed out in a final, desperate attempt to stop them, but it was no use. The light grew stronger, more intense, until finally, there was nothing left. The darkness collapsed in on itself, leaving only the faintest echo of the hollow man's voice in the wind. And then silence. Eli stumbled forward, his body shaking with exhaustion. The light faded, leaving behind the calm, cool forest once more. The oppressive weight of fear was gone, replaced with the stillness of the night. Sarah stood there, gasping, her face pale but filled with relief. She looked at Eli, her eyes wide with gratitude. You saved me," she whispered, her voice trembling. Eli nodded, his chest still tight with the remnants of fear. "No. You saved yourself?" But as he spoke those words, a strange feeling settled over him. The hollow man was gone, but something still lingered in the air. The forest seemed different, as if it were still watching, waiting. Eli couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. The forest was eerily quiet. Eli stood in the clearing, his breath ragged from the intensity of the confrontation. The oppressive weight of fear, the all-consuming presence of the hollow man, had vanished. But as Sarah shakily stood beside him, her eyes wide and filled with both relief and confusion, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off, something wasn't right. He glanced around, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of his silver blade. The air felt different now, lighter, yet there was a strange pressure that hung in the trees, like the calm before a storm. He couldn't explain it, but he knew that the hollow man's defeat had not come without consequences. This wasn't over. Sarah, still trembling, stepped closer to Eli. What was that? It was like I could feel it inside me, pulling me, controlling me. But then I felt something else, something brighter, something stronger. Eli nodded, his gaze scanning the clearing as he slowly backed toward the center. That was you, Sarah. The hollow man feeds on fear. But you have something stronger than fearing you. You just had to find it. She frowned, her hands shaking. I don't understand. Why me? Why was I the one? Because you were chosen. Eli interrupted, his voice steady but full of a somber understanding. The hollow man doesn't just take anyone. It seeks out those with fear, those whose souls are vulnerable. And it binds them, keeps them trapped, feeding on their terror until they become a part of it. But you fought back. His words hung in the air between them, but a thought gnawed at him, unspoken yet undeniable. The hollow man might have been driven back, but it was not gone. Eli had seen enough to know that creatures like this didn't just vanish. It had been too ancient, too tied to the land, to truly die. No, it was waiting, lurking in the shadows for the right moment to strike again. The breeze picked up again, rustling the leaves with a sudden chill. Something in the air changed. The light from the moon flickered, casting strange shadows across the trees. The hairs on the back of Eli's neck stood up. He turned quickly, his instincts on high alert. A sudden, violent crack echoed through the forest. The ground beneath their feet trembled. Eli's eyes shot to Sarah. Get back! Before she could react, the ground split open in front of them. A massive black tendril shot up from the earth, splitting the earth like a wound. The air became thick with the stench of decay, of something ancient and rotting, as a shape emerged from the chasm. It was the hollow man, but different. It wasn't the form they had destroyed earlier. It was more solid now, more powerful, its form shifting and twisting like a nightmare made of shadow and roots. And this time, it was angrier. You thought you could banish me? The creature rasped, its voice like 1,000 whispers. You cannot destroy me. I am the land. I am the fear in your hearts. And you will never escape me. Eli's heart raced as he gripped his silver blade. This wasn't the same battle. It wasn't just about killing the creature anymore. It had grown, evolved. It had fed on their fear, and now it was stronger than before. The hollow man had learned from its defeat. and it wasn't about to let them leave again. "We need to get out of here," Eli shouted, pulling Sarah back toward the trees. But she was frozen again, her feet planted firmly in place. I can't," she whispered, her voice shaking. "It's too strong. It's everywhere." Eli turned, pulling her to face him. "You are stronger than it. Do you understand? You're not alone. You're not trapped. You can fight this. We can fight this together." But as his words left his mouth, the hollow man let out a low, guttural laugh, and the ground began to shift again. The earth cracked, and the air grew thick with the pressure of its malevolent presence. The creature was everywhere, all at once, creeping up from the earth and surrounding them in every direction. It wasn't just one creature anymore. It was the very land itself. It was alive, living in the trees, the earth, the air. And Eli knew that they had made a grave mistake by thinking they had banished it. "I will never leave this place," the hollow man growled, the ground quaking beneath them as the tendrils stretched higher, curling around the trees, binding the very forest to its will. "You cannot escape me. You cannot outrun me." Eli's pulse raced. The walls of reality were closing in, and Sarah's eyes were wide with terror once more, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Eli," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What do we do now?" He turned, his gaze scanning the forest. The moon above them was now dim, obscured by the creeping shadows that had begun to overtake the sky. The hollow man was drawing them in, closing the circle around them, and the forest felt like it was tightening its grip with each passing second. In that moment, Eli understood something that had been missing before. It wasn't just about fighting the creature. It was about breaking the cycle. The hollow man had fed on Sarah's fear, on the fear of everyone it had claimed over the years. But it had also lived through that fear. It had grown stronger from it. The only way to truly defeat it wasn't to fight it with blades or fire. It was to break its hold, to take away the one thing it thrived on. Fear. Eli took a deep breath, his eyes locking onto Sarah. Listen to me. Fear is all it has. And it can't control you unless you let it. You have to fight back, all the way back. His voice dropped low, a whisper just for her. You are not trapped. You can leave this place. You can break free. Sarah's eyes searched his face, her own terror still there, but something else flickered in her eyes now. She was listening. The hollow man screamed in fury, its tendrils crashing around them, thrashing the earth like a violent storm. But Eli stood firm. This was it. This was the only chance they had. "Take control, Sarah!" he shouted, his voice breaking through the chaos. "Take it all back. Fight. The fear is yours to command, not the other way around. Do it!" For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The world fell into silence, and Eli felt the weight of time stretch impossibly long. He felt Sarah's fear, felt it deep in his own bones, but then, something shifted. It was like a dam breaking. Sarah closed her eyes, and for the first time, the fear didn't consume her. Instead, it cracked, and a wave of light, pure, bright, and full of strength, burst from her chest. The hollow man shrieked in agony, its form shriveling and shattering under the force of the light, its tendrils burning and recoiling. "No more," Sarah whispered, her voice firm, as if she had spoken the words into the very heart of the creature. No more. The darkness shattered. The hollow man's scream filled the forest, deafening and violent, but the light was too much, too powerful. It consumed the creature, disintegrating it into nothingness, until the very earth beneath them settled with a final, tremulous sigh. And then, silence. Eli turned to Sarah, his chest still heaving, but his eyes wide with amazement. She had done it. She had broken the cycle. But the forest was still, and the air was heavy. It was over, for now. But Eli knew. There was always something waiting in the shadows. The hollow man had been defeated, but the land still carried the echoes of its power. And he knew they weren't the only ones who had fallen victim to it. "We'll leave," Eli said quietly, but with the weight of certainty. "We'll get you home. We'll make sure this never happens again." But deep down, he knew that the battle for the souls of those lost in the woods was far from over. The hollow man had been banished, but it would always return. And when it did, he'd be waiting. The morning after the battle, the forest felt too still. Eli and Sarah stood in the clearing, the remnants of the night's terror slowly fading, but the air still thick with something unspoken. The sun, pale and distant, cast long shadows across the land, and the trees that once felt alive with the hollow man's influence now stood still and silent, their leaves trembling in the faint breeze. Eli scanned the horizon, his eyes narrowed, but even as the sunlight touched the earth, he felt that unmistakable sense of unease, like the calm before a storm. The hollow man was gone, for now, but it had left something behind. Something more insidious. Sarah stood beside him, her expression soft but haunted. I don't understand," she whispered, her voice filled with confusion and disbelief. How did I do that? How did I make it go away?" Eli didn't answer immediately. He didn't fully understand it himself. The hollow man had been a manifestation of fear, an ancient creature that thrived on the terror of those it ensnared. But Sarah had fought it, with light, with the pure force of will that transcended everything the hollow man had tried to do to her. She had resisted, and that had broken its hold. "It's not about how," Eli said, his voice steady, but his mind still racing. "It's about who you are. You didn't just let the fear take you, you faced it. You became something stronger than the creature." He turned, meeting her eyes. "You saved yourself, Sarah. You saved us both." But even as he spoke the words, doubt gnawed at the back of his mind. The hollow man hadn't truly been defeated. Eli knew it. He could feel it in his bones. There was something unfinished about the way it had retreated. It had fed on them, on their fear, and now it was lying in wait. Whatever piece of it had remained would come back. The air was too still, and the world around them felt too empty. "Let's get out of here," Eli said, his voice laced with an urgency that surprised even him. "The longer we stay, the more dangerous it becomes." But as they turned to leave the clearing, the forest seemed to shift around them. The trees, once silent, began to whisper. Soft murmurs, like the rustling of leaves, but too distinct, too purposeful. Eli's heart began to race again. This wasn't just the wind. This was something else. He grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her to a halt. "Stay close," he whispered, his grip tightening. The air around them seemed to grow colder, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. Then, through the trees, a shadow flickered at the edge of their vision, something shifting, moving. The ground trembled beneath their feet. "No," Eli murmured, his voice barely audible. "It's not over." The hollow man was returning. Before he could react, a massive, dark form burst from the trees, crashing into the clearing with the force of a storm. It was him, but not him. The creature had reformed, but this time, it was no longer a mere shadow. It was something else, something worse. Its form was massive, made up of living darkness. The tendrils stretched out in every direction, like the very forest itself had come alive to answer its call. The hollow man's hollow face flickered in and out of existence, and its voice, a terrible, distorted growl, filled the clearing, vibrating through their bones. "You cannot escape me," it hissed, its voice split into multiple echoes, each one more menacing than the last. "You cannot stop the hunger. I am eternal. I am the fear that exists between every heartbeat, between every breath you take." Eli drew his silver blade once more, its glow flickering weakly in the oppressive darkness. He couldn't deny the fear creeping up his spine. He'd fought this creature before, but now it was different. Now it wasn't just about fear, it was about survival. "Sarah," he said urgently, his voice low. "Run." But Sarah stood rooted to the spot, her eyes locked onto the creature. The fear in her face had returned, but it wasn't the helpless fear from before. This time, she was ready. She had faced the creature once. She could face it again. "I'm not running," she said, her voice stronger now. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." The hollow man screeched in fury, its tendrils whipping through the air, crashing into the trees around them with violent force. "You cannot stop me," it howled. "I will consume you both. Your souls will become one with me, and you will serve me for eternity." But Sarah, her eyes blazing with defiance, raised her hands before her, the air around her pulsing with the light that had first exploded from her chest. The light was no longer just an instinctive defense. This time, it was controlled, focused, like a weapon formed from the very core of her being. Eli couldn't help but stare in awe as the light surrounded Sarah, pushing back against the creature's darkness. "Sarah, you—" "I told you," she interrupted, her voice full of determination. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." The hollow man screeched in agony as the light from Sarah's outstretched hands surged forward, cutting through the shadows like a blade. But the creature fought back. Its tendrils lashed out, tangling with the light, trying to smother it, to quench the fire within her. The struggle between light and dark intensified, the air crackling with energy. Eli didn't know how long they could hold out. The hollow man was powerful, too powerful. But Sarah wasn't backing down. "This isn't just a battle of strength," Eli said, his voice quiet but urgent. "It's a battle of will. You control this." Sarah's eyes were wide with focus, her body trembling with the effort, but her resolve was clear. She was fighting back. And then it happened. A sudden surge of light exploded from her chest, enveloping the entire clearing, blasting the hollow man's tendrils away in a wave of pure, radiant energy. The creature howled in pain, its form beginning to splinter, its darkness writhing and crackling in the wake of the light. The hollow man screeched once more, its voice filled with rage and desperation. "This isn't the end!" it bellowed, its form dissolving into the air. I will return. I will take all of you with me. But as the last of its words faded, the forest fell into a deathly silence. Eli's legs were trembling from the effort, but he managed to stay on his feet. The light from Sarah's chest slowly began to dim, and the oppressive weight of the hollow man's presence faded from the clearing. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, the kind that only came after a storm had passed. Sarah collapsed to her knees, breathing heavily, her face pale but filled with relief. Eli stepped forward, kneeling beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he said softly. "You stopped it." Sarah shook her head, her breath still coming in ragged gasps. "No, Eli. It's not over. I can feel it. It's still here." Eli froze. Her words sank into him like a stone in water. There was a growing sense of unease in the air, a whisper in the wind. The hollow man may have been banished, but its presence lingered, somewhere, out there, waiting. And Eli knew, deep down, that they had not yet seen the last of it. The clearing was bathed in an unnatural silence. The air, thick with the remnants of the battle, seemed to hang in suspended animation. Eli's heart beat heavily in his chest as he helped Sarah to her feet, her body trembling with exhaustion. Despite the creature's defeat, despite the light that had driven it back, there was a sense of wrongness that lingered, like the air itself hadn't fully exhaled. Sarah's eyes were wide, still filled with the haunting memory of the hollow man. "It's not over, Eli," she whispered, her voice raw. "I can feel it. It's still here." Eli scanned the clearing once more, his senses heightened. His instincts told him she was right. The forest, once eerily still, now seemed to hold its breath. The trees, tall and foreboding, stood as silent witnesses, their leaves barely stirring in the growing breeze. The shadows beneath them were darker now, deeper than before, as if something was still lurking just beyond the edge of reality. "I know," Eli said, his voice steady but with a hint of uncertainty. He could feel it too. The hollow man might have been vanquished, its physical form destroyed, but the connection to this place was far too strong, and the creature's power far too ancient to simply vanish. The air around them buzzed with a quiet malevolence. He had faced creatures that thrived on fear before. Ghosts that tormented the living, demons that fed on souls. But none of them had been like this. The hollow man was more than a creature. It was a force, a manifestation of terror itself. And terror, Eli knew, never truly disappeared. "There's something else going on here," he murmured, more to himself than to Sarah. "This place, it's tied to the land. The hollow man didn't just feed on you. It's been growing here for centuries. And it won't just give up that easily." Sarah's eyes flickered with something Eli couldn't quite place. Fear, yes, but also something else. Understanding. She knew deep down that this wasn't over. That the land they were standing on, this place, had a history. A curse, perhaps. A dark bond that tied it all together. The hollow man was just a symptom of something older, deeper, darker. "I don't want to leave," Sarah said suddenly, her voice strong despite the fear in her eyes. "Not yet." Eli raised an eyebrow, surprised. "What do you mean?" She looked back toward the forest, her gaze distant, as if seeing something beyond the trees. "We can't just leave. We can't run anymore. The determination in her voice struck Eli hard. He saw it then, the quiet resolve that had been growing inside her, the strength that had allowed her to fight the Hollow Man. She wasn't just running from fear anymore. She was confronting it. "I'm not leaving this place until I make sure it's really gone," she said. "Until I know it can never come back." Eli hesitated. He knew the weight of what she was saying. He had been through countless hunts, seen countless horrors, and had learned the hard way that sometimes, leaving the job unfinished meant that the monster would come back with a vengeance. But something in Sarah's words resonated deep within him. She wasn't just trying to survive anymore. She wanted to end this, once and for all. "You're right," he said quietly. "If we leave now, we're just letting it win. Letting it linger." Together, they stood in the clearing, facing the trees, the very land that had borne the creature's terror. The wind picked up again, rustling the branches above them. But it wasn't the sound of nature. It was something else. The trees seemed to whisper, like they were alive with secrets long buried. Eli's gaze turned toward the horizon, his thoughts sharp and calculating. The Hollow Man's influence might have been broken, but the land was still tethered to it. Whatever had allowed the creature to rise, whatever dark force had fed it and kept it bound to this place, needed to be severed. Completely. "If we're going to end this," Eli said, his voice firm, "we need to get to the heart of this place. Find out what's really keeping it alive." Sarah nodded, determination set on her face. "Where do we start?" Eli's mind raced as he searched for an answer. "The old journal," he said suddenly. "The one Sheriff Hawkins had. It had clues, things about the circle and the land, about the Hollow Man's connection to it. There has to be more. If we can find the source of the creature's power, we can destroy it for good." "But the journal's back at the church," Sarah pointed out. "We have to go all the way back there?" Eli's jaw tightened. The church had been the first place where he and Hawkins had discovered the extent of the creature's influence. It was the place where the Hollow Man had been most active. And if the journal was right, then it was the key to unraveling whatever twisted force had bound the creature to this land. "We don't have a choice," Eli said. "We have to go back. Now." They turned together and began walking back toward the edge of the forest, where the church lay in the distance. The path was narrow, twisting through the trees that seemed to stretch higher than before, their branches twisting like gnarled fingers trying to reach out and grab them. Eli couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching, waiting. The trees felt alive in a way they never had before. Their shadows seemed darker, more menacing. Then, as they walked, something strange happened. The whispers returned. It started faintly, just a murmur in the wind. At first, Eli thought it was the rustling of leaves, the natural sound of the forest. But the whispers grew louder. No, not louder, clearer. They were voices, distorted, incomprehensible, but unmistakably human. They rose from the ground, from the trees, from the very air around them. Eli froze. His pulse quickened as he looked around, searching for the source. Sarah's hand shot out and grabbed his arm. "What is that?" The air felt electric now. The forest around them had become too quiet, too heavy, and the voices seemed to press in on them, echoing in their minds, pulling at their very thoughts. They were whispers of regret, of fear, of torment. And they were growing louder. Eli's eyes widened as realization struck. The Hollow Man wasn't just a creature of fear. It was the culmination of all the souls it had consumed. This land, this cursed place, was the true source of its power. The voices of the lost, of the victims it had claimed, were still trapped here, still feeding it. And now, as it regained its strength, the Hollow Man was calling them, drawing them back into its grasp. "We have to move," Eli said, his voice hard and sharp. "Now." But it was already too late. The whispers reached a fever pitch, the voices of the lost souls filling the air, and before Eli could react, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The Hollow Man was returning once more. The ground beneath Eli's feet trembled, a low rumble vibrating through the earth, as the voices of the lost souls around them grew louder. Their whispers filled the air, unintelligible but heavy with despair and regret, wrapping around Eli and Sarah like a tightening noose. The forest had come alive, alive with the fear it had been feeding on, alive with the power of the Hollow Man. Eli's breath quickened as the path before them seemed to warp and bend, the trees twisting at impossible angles, reaching down with gnarled branches like clawed hands. The whispering was no longer a mere sound. It was a presence, a weight pressing against their minds. It wasn't just the voices anymore. The forest itself was alive, alive with the spirit of the Hollow, the thing that had fed on terror for generations. "Eli!" Sarah's voice cut through the swirling chaos around them. Her grip on his arm tightened, her face pale, but her eyes burning with resolve. "What's happening? What is all this?" Eli's gaze shot around the clearing, the trees, the earth beneath them. It all seemed to twist, bending as if the very land was being pulled into a vortex. The whispers were deafening now, each voice laced with torment, echoing through his mind. And in the distance, he could see it, the church, the place where it had all begun. "It's here," Eli said through gritted teeth. "It's all connected. The forest, the land, the Hollow Man, it feeds on the souls of the lost. It's using them to rebuild itself. What do we do?" Sarah asked, her voice frantic now, the weight of the situation sinking in. Eli didn't hesitate. He had fought demons, ghosts, and creatures born of nightmares, but this was different. This wasn't just a fight against a monster. It was a battle for the souls trapped in the land, for the very fabric of reality that the Hollow Man had corrupted. "We have to go to the heart of this place," Eli said, his voice filled with certainty. "The church. It's where it all started. It's the source of the power that's keeping this place alive." Sarah nodded, determination in her eyes. Together, they turned and began to run, the path ahead of them now a blur of shifting shadows and whispers. The air grew heavier with each step, and the ground beneath them seemed to pulse, as if the earth itself was alive and hunting them. The church came into view, looming over the clearing like a twisted monument to darkness. The stone walls were cracked and weathered, the stained glass windows shattered, leaving only jagged shards in their place. The door, once solid and unyielding, hung loosely from its hinges, as though beckoning them inside. But it was the feeling that struck Eli hardest, an overwhelming presence that seemed to fill the air, the very atmosphere around them charged with a malevolent energy. It wasn't just the Hollow Man. It was everything that had been feared here, everything that had been trapped in the land. As they stepped closer, the ground beneath them cracked open, and the wind howled with an unnatural ferocity, carrying with it the voices of the lost, the souls consumed by the hollow man. Eli gritted his teeth and pushed forward, his grip on Sarah's arm never wavering. "Stay close," he warned, his voice tight. "Whatever happens in there, don't let go. Don't let fear take you again." Together, they stepped inside the church. The air within was thick and heavy, the darkness pressing in like a physical force. The walls were covered in creeping vines, blackened and withered, the remnants of something that had long since rotted away. The only light came from the faint glow of the silver blade in Eli's hand, casting long shadows across the altar. And there it was. At the heart of the church, beneath the altar, a swirling mass of darkness, alive, pulsing, breathing. The hollow man's essence, the source of its power, was here, wrapped in the very earth beneath the church. It was as though the land itself had become a vessel for its malevolent force, its roots sinking deep into the heart of the earth. "It's feeding," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "It's feeding off this place, off the souls trapped here. All the fear, it's giving it power." Eli's eyes darkened. He could feel it, the hunger, the ancient, insatiable hunger of the creature. It wasn't just the hollow man, it was the land, the curse that had held it here, fed it, and fed off it. The only way to destroy it completely, to sever its hold on this land, was to break the curse. To cut off the source of its power. "We have to destroy it," Eli said, his voice low but filled with resolve. "We have to destroy the heart of this place, the heart of the hollow." But as soon as he spoke, the ground beneath them trembled, and the darkness in the church shifted. It wasn't just the hollow man anymore. The church itself seemed to come alive, its walls cracked, the very stones of the floor shifting and pulling apart, as if the land was fighting back. "No!" Sarah screamed, stumbling backward as the floor split beneath her. "It's coming! It's too strong!" Eli's heart raced. The hollow man was fighting them, but it wasn't just the creature. The land was alive. It had been corrupted by the fear, by the terror of the souls it had consumed. And now it was fighting to keep them trapped. Without thinking, Eli lunged forward, his blade raised high. He slashed through the air with everything he had, the silver cutting through the darkness like a blade through smoke. As the tip of the blade connected with the pulsing mass at the heart of the church, there was a flash of blinding light. The world seemed to stop. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. And then, the hollow man's shriek echoed through the church, a sound of pure rage, pure desperation. The ground beneath them cracked open completely, and the black mass at the heart of the church began to writhe, its tendrils shooting out in every direction, wrapping around the walls, the altar, everything. But Eli didn't stop. He drove the silver blade deeper, and with one final, desperate strike, he thrust the blade into the heart of the darkness. The world exploded. Light and sound, raw and blinding, filled the air. The earth beneath their feet shook with an intensity that made Eli's teeth rattle. The church's walls cracked and crumbled, the very foundations of the land breaking apart as the creature's dark grip began to loosen. The hollow man's screech was deafening, but it was fading, dissolving, like a nightmare unraveling before the light of day. The tendrils of darkness that had once reached for them fell away, disintegrating like ash in the wind. And then silence. Eli collapsed to his knees, gasping for air, his body shaking from the force of what had just happened. The blade still clutched in his hand glowed faintly, its power slowly ebbing away as the light from the church began to dim. Sarah stood beside him, her face pale but relieved. "It's over," she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. Eli didn't answer. He looked around the ruined church, the wreckage of the forest outside, and for the first time, he allowed himself to believe it was done. But even as they stood there, the land still felt heavy. Eli knew that, even though the Hollow Man was gone, the scar it had left on this place, on this land, would never fully heal. And somewhere, deep within the earth, there would always be a whisper, a reminder, of what had once been, and what might return. The silence that followed the Hollow Man's destruction was both a blessing and a curse. The church lay in ruins, the stone walls shattered and crumbled, the altar reduced to rubble. The forest outside, once so thick with shadow, now stood still, its twisted branches bending toward the sky like mourning arms. The oppressive weight of fear that had once blanketed the land had lifted, but in its place lingered something else, something heavier, more unsettling. It was as if the land itself was exhaling a long-held breath, but it wasn't finished. Eli and Sarah stood amidst the wreckage, breathing heavily, their eyes scanning the broken church, the remnants of the Hollow Man's presence still hanging in the air. The light from Eli's blade faded to a dull glow, the silver dimming as its power was spent. They had done it. They had destroyed the Hollow Man, severed its hold on the land. But something in the air told Eli that there was more to this place than just the creature. "Is it really over?" Sarah asked, her voice soft and filled with lingering doubt as she looked around the ruined church. "I mean, it feels like it's over, but—" Eli turned to her, his gaze heavy with thought. "I don't know," he admitted. "It's not always as simple as killing the thing that's causing the terror. The land, it's still scarred. The Hollow Man may be gone, but whatever it was, whatever it left here, it's not gone." Sarah glanced up at the sky, her eyes distant. "I can still feel it. That weight, the pull of it, even if it's gone, I don't think the land will ever be the same." Eli nodded, his jaw tightening. The Hollow Man had been more than just a monster. It had been a manifestation of something darker, something ancient. And even if they had destroyed it, its presence had infected the land, twisted it, made it part of itself. Fear had a way of lingering, of seeping into the bones of a place, and never truly leaving. "We'll never be able to erase what happened here," Eli said quietly, his eyes scanning the shattered altar. "But we can make sure it doesn't come back. We can make sure the cycle doesn't continue." Sarah was quiet for a moment, and then her gaze fell on something in the distance, something Eli had missed in his frantic search for answers. Through the wreckage of the church, half hidden in the shattered stone, a faint flicker of light glimmered, a small, bright spark in the ruined altar. Eli's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just the sunlight filtering through the cracks of the building. It was something else, a subtle pulse of energy that felt too alive. "Do you see that?" Sarah asked, her voice low. Eli's eyes narrowed as he approached the altar, stepping over the rubble with a sense of urgency. He reached out, feeling an unsettling pull toward the faint light. As his fingers brushed against the stone, a jolt of energy surged through him, making his skin crawl. The ground beneath him seemed to tremble again, but this time, it wasn't the Hollow Man's wrath. It was something different. A warning. A signal. What is it? Sarah asked, her voice tinged with fear, but also curiosity. Eli didn't respond at first. His mind was racing. This wasn't just residual energy from the Hollow Man. It was something else, something still buried here. He reached down, brushing away the stone, uncovering the source of the light. A small, ornate object lay half buried in the dirt, shaped like an ancient, cracked amulet, its surface darkened and weathered with age. But the light, it was coming from the very heart of the amulet. The center was hollowed out, glowing faintly, almost beckoning. Eli's fingers hovered over the object, and in that moment, everything seemed to slow. The air around them thickened, and the ground beneath their feet trembled again. But this time it wasn't the same tremor. It was something deeper, more ancient. Something more powerful. The heart of the hollow, Eli murmured, realizing what he was holding. The source. The land wasn't just corrupted by the Hollow Man, it's tied to this. Sarah stepped forward, her eyes wide with disbelief. That's it? That's the thing that's been feeding everything? Eli nodded slowly, feeling the pulse of energy radiate from the amulet. It's not just a relic. It's a part of the Hollow Man. A fragment of the curse that's bound to this land. We destroyed the creature, but this was the heart of its power. As long as it was here, the land could never truly heal. He turned the amulet over in his hand, watching as the light from its core flickered, now fading, then flaring up once more. It felt alive in his palm, almost like it was breathing. We have to destroy it, Eli said, his voice firm. It's the last piece. The final tether to the Hollow Man. If we don't destroy this, it'll come back. It'll always come back. Sarah looked at him, hesitation flickering in her eyes. But what if it's too dangerous? What if destroying it isn't the answer? Eli shook his head, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. If we don't, we're condemning everyone who ever sets foot here. The Hollow Man won't just fade. It will wait, it will grow stronger, and it will take more people. He stepped toward the altar, the amulet in hand, and without another word, he raised it high. The forest around them seemed to fall into a hush, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The air grew cold as the light from the amulet pulsed with growing intensity, its glow blinding. Goodbye, Eli whispered to the land. With one final swing of his arm, he smashed the amulet onto the stone altar. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the light erupted in a violent explosion, sending shockwaves through the ground beneath them. The air crackled with energy, and Eli was thrown backward, his body crashing into the broken stone of the church. Sarah screamed as the ground beneath them cracked wide open, the earth trembling violently. The amulet disintegrated in a burst of radiant energy, its remnants scattering like dust in the wind. The pulse of light that had emanated from it was gone, leaving behind nothing but the aftermath of destruction. The very air felt clearer, as if a weight had been lifted from the land. Eli coughed, shaking his head to clear the ringing in his ears. As the dust settled, he slowly pulled himself to his feet, his body sore but alive. He looked at Sarah, who was also regaining her balance, her face pale but relieved. "We did it," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. But Eli wasn't sure. He wasn't sure it was over. The forest was still. Too still. The trees, once full of whispered voices, stood silent, their twisted branches frozen in place. The air, though no longer oppressive, still felt thick with something Eli couldn't quite define. For a moment, he felt like he was being watched, not by the creature they had destroyed, but by something else. Something new. He looked around one last time. The hollow man was gone. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something far darker was still waiting. Waiting to be born from the soil they had just torn apart. And somewhere, deep beneath the church, something still stirred. The silence that followed the destruction of the amulet felt unnerving, like the stillness after a storm has passed, but before the winds have had a chance to die down. Eli stood in the wreckage of the church, his muscles aching, his mind spinning with everything that had just happened. The air felt different, lighter, yet there was something lingering in the silence. The land wasn't as heavy as it had been, but it wasn't healed. It felt like a wound that had been closed too quickly, a scar that still burned under the surface. He turned towards Sarah, who was still trembling slightly, though her expression was one of relief. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the fragile peace they had fought for. Eli hesitated, eyes scanning the empty, shattered church. The place where so much terror had taken root now felt oddly still, like it was holding its breath, unsure of what was to come. "I don't know," he said, his voice heavy. "It's over for now, but there's something here, something still, waiting." Sarah took a step toward him, her brow furrowed with concern. "What do you mean?" "The hollow man is gone. The land, everything's cleared." Eli's gaze shifted to the cracked stone altar, where they had just destroyed the heart of the hollow man's curse. The energy from the amulet still pulsed faintly in the back of his mind, as if the remnants of the curse were now attempting to reassert themselves. The hollow man was never just one thing. It was a symptom, a manifestation of something older, something that's tied to this place. We've destroyed it, but the source, the core of its power, it's still here. Sarah looked around at the desolate church, the wreckage, the darkness still clinging to the walls. "You mean the land itself? The curse?" Eli nodded slowly. "This place, Sarah, the hollow man was never the root of it. It was the vessel. The thing feeding off of fear, feeding off of the souls trapped here. It's still tied to this land. As long as we leave, it'll remain dormant, but it won't be gone. This land has been corrupted." He turned to face the broken altar again, the unsettling quiet of the space closing in on him. The whispers were gone, but he still felt watched. Something was deep beneath the earth, something dark and ancient. The hollow man was only the first layer of the curse, and as much as they had fought, Eli knew they hadn't yet gotten to the heart of it. Sarah stepped closer to him, her voice unwavering. "What are you thinking, Eli?" Eli's eyes hardened as he turned back to her. "We're not done yet." Suddenly, the ground beneath them shifted again, a subtle tremor at first, like the earth was waking, stretching, reaching toward them. Eli's pulse quickened, and his breath caught in his throat as the floor of the church cracked, sending spiderweb-like fractures in every direction. "Not again," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with dread. Eli's eyes widened as he looked down, watching the cracks in the floor widen. Something was rising from beneath them. His hand instinctively went to the silver blade at his side, though he knew it was now useless against whatever was coming. It wasn't the Hollow Man. It was something older, something deeper. The ground trembled harder now, shaking with force. The very foundation of the church groaned under the pressure. The stones cracked and crumbled as the earth began to give way. And then, the sound. A deep, resonating hum filled the air, an ancient, guttural growl that seemed to come from the earth itself. It wasn't a voice, it wasn't the Hollow Man. This was something different. A presence, a force that had been buried long ago. The floor beneath their feet split open, and through the cracks, a great, black tendril shot up from the earth, wrapping around the altar, pulling the shattered stone deeper into the ground. The tendril was thick, pulsating with a dark, viscous energy that reeked of decay and death. As it moved, the shadows in the room deepened, growing thicker, as if the very light was being consumed. Eli staggered back, his breath coming faster. This isn't possible. Sarah's voice cracked with realization. It's the land itself, she said. It's feeding on everything. The Hollow Man wasn't the only thing here. The tendril reached higher, twisting and curling, until it formed into something recognizable, a face. Not a human face, but a twisted, monstrous visage of roots and stone, eyes like hollow pits, dripping with the same dark energy that had overtaken the land. Eli's heart pounded in his chest as the creature's voice, low and rumbling, yet filled with endless malice, rose from the earth. You have not destroyed me. You have only awakened me. It wasn't a voice, not truly. It was a force of will, a deep, ancient consciousness that had existed beneath the land for as long as time itself. It wasn't the Hollow Man, it was something more primordial. Something older than the earth, older than the curse itself. Eli's stomach sank. What are you? He demanded. The creature's tendrils writhed in the air, as if laughing. I am the root. The heart of the Hollow. Sarah stepped forward, her expression hardening as she looked up at the monstrous figure. The heart of the Hollow? She asked, her voice filled with understanding. But the Hollow Man, the curse, it's all connected to you. The creature's tendrils hissed, and the ground groaned with the weight of its power. I have been buried here for eons, feeding off the fear and death of this land. I am the curse that binds this place, the heart that pumps its life through the soil. You killed the Hollow Man, but he was merely my servant. I am the land, and the land is me. Eli's mind raced, every piece of the puzzle clicking into place. The Hollow Man had been a servant, a mere manifestation of the fear and torment the root had fed on. It had grown strong on the terror of the town, the souls that had vanished into its grasp, the unending cycle of fear and death. But now, with the Hollow Man gone, the true force, the true evil, had emerged. We have to destroy it, Sarah said, her voice resolute. This is what's been feeding off everything. We end it now. Eli nodded grimly, his hand tightening on the hilt of his blade. But he knew deep in his gut that this was going to be no simple battle. The root wasn't just a monster, it was the very soul of the land. The only way to truly sever its grip was to destroy the source, to burn it from existence. The ground beneath them shifted again as the root's tendrils reached higher, and the air filled with the stench of decay. You think you can defeat me? You cannot. I have always been here. Eli's grip tightened on his blade. We'll see about that. The ground beneath them continued to quake as the roots' tendrils writhed through the air like serpents, pulsing with dark, malevolent energy. The room around them seemed to close in, the shadows swallowing the remnants of the shattered church. The once faint hum had turned into a deafening roar, and the air felt thick with the weight of an ancient force, one that had been waiting for this very moment. Eli and Sarah stood frozen, both realizing with stark clarity that this was the true test. The Hollow Man had been the manifestation of the root's power, a creature born from the land's curse, but now the real battle began. The root itself, the heart of the Hollow, was alive, and it was far older, far stronger than anything they had faced before. Eli turned to Sarah, his eyes grim. "We need to destroy it, now. Before it takes everything." The creature's voice echoed around them, filling the church with a chilling, hollow resonance. You cannot destroy what is eternal, Hunter. You cannot kill the land itself. I am the land. The terror, the fear that has soaked this place for centuries. I am that fear. And now you are mine. Eli's stomach churned, but his resolve hardened. They had fought the Hollow Man, yes, but this was the true enemy, the true source of everything that had plagued this place. It was no longer just about survival. They were fighting for the souls that had been lost to the land, Sarah's, Hawkins, everyone's. Eli gripped his silver blade, its dim light flickering. It had served him well, but he knew that the root was no ordinary foe. It wasn't just flesh, it was the land. It was fear incarnate, a force that had been living, breathing, and feeding for eons. The only way to destroy it was to sever its connection to the land, to destroy its very foundation. The tendrils of the root surged forward, thick and dripping with a viscous black substance, moving faster than Eli could react. Before he could swing the blade, a massive tendril wrapped around him, tightening with crushing force, lifting him off the ground. "Eli!" Sarah screamed, her voice filled with terror. She reached out, but another tendril shot toward her, and she was thrown back against the altar, crashing into the broken stone. Her breath left her in a wheeze, and for a moment, everything felt still. The root's voice filled Eli's mind, low and mocking. "You cannot win, Hunter. I am the land, the soil beneath your feet, the trees that shade you, the wind that whispers in your ear. You have no power over me. You are nothing but a fleeting shadow in the darkness of eternity." Eli gasped for air, his body crushed beneath the tendril's grip. The pressure was suffocating, his vision blurring as darkness crept in at the edges of his sight. He could feel the cold, ancient power of the root seeping into him, filling his mind with terror, with doubt. It was trying to break him, to feed on his fear, just as it had fed on the fear of those who had walked this land before. But Eli fought back. Fear wasn't his enemy, it was his weapon. The root didn't understand that. He focused. Blocked out the whispers of the land. Blocked out the pressure, the suffocating darkness. The silver blade in his hand pulsed with the energy of his defiance. With a roar, Eli slashed the blade through the air. The tendril around him recoiled in pain, and the grip loosened just enough for him to slip free. He fell to the ground, gasping for breath, but he didn't hesitate. He was on his feet again in an instant, eyes locked on the pulsing heart of the root. "You are nothing," Eli spat, raising the blade high. The light from it flared brightly, cutting through the thick shadows. "You are just a memory, a curse." And we are ending it. The root screeched, its form twisting and undulating violently. The air shook with its fury, the ground beneath them cracking wide, as if the earth itself was breaking apart in the wake of their defiance. Sarah, still struggling to rise from the altar, found her strength, her resolve burning brighter than ever. She glanced at Eli, her voice filled with renewed purpose. "We can do this, Eli. Together." She pulled herself to her feet, summoning that same power she had used before, the light from deep within her radiating out, pushing back against the creeping darkness. The energy of her fear, no longer a weakness, was now a force she commanded. The root's tendrils reached for them, but Sarah's light burned through them like wildfire. Eli could feel the heat of it, the raw energy filling the church, pushing the creature back. But it wasn't enough to destroy the root. They had to do more. They had to sever the connection, the heart of the curse that had bound this land together for centuries. "We have to destroy the heart," Eli said through gritted teeth. "We have to destroy the root from within. It's not just about fighting it. It's about cutting the thread it's woven into the land." Sarah nodded, understanding what Eli meant. They had already destroyed the creature's physical form, but the true power of the root was in the land, in the very soil beneath their feet. As Sarah focused on the light, Eli lunged forward, diving toward the center of the church, the altar. He could feel the dark energy coiling beneath the floor, the pulse of the root. It was connected to the very heart of the earth beneath them. The blade still glowing, he thrust it down into the center of the altar, driving it deep into the earth. The moment it connected, the ground beneath them shattered. A bright, blinding light exploded from the point of impact, bursting through the walls of the church and up into the sky. The root let out a horrific scream, its form contorting and unraveling as the light tore through it. The land trembled, the earth shaking as if it were being torn apart. Eli's ears rang with the sound of the creature's wailing, but he didn't stop. He kept pushing the blade deeper, forcing the light into the very heart of the curse, until the ground beneath them began to collapse. With a final, violent eruption, the light consumed everything, the tendrils, the heart of the root, the church, and the land. And then, there was nothing but silence. The world held its breath. When Eli opened his eyes, the church was gone. The ground beneath them was no longer trembling. The oppressive weight of fear, the shadows that had gripped this land for centuries, had vanished. The forest outside, once twisted and rotting, now seemed normal. The trees swayed in the wind as they should have, the sunlight filtering through their leaves. Sarah stood beside him, her face pale but full of relief. Her light had faded, and the world seemed to breathe again. "We did it," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse but filled with awe. "It's over." Eli nodded, but the uneasy feeling lingered in his chest. He didn't feel the hollow man's presence anymore. He didn't feel the root. But deep down, Eli knew that something had changed in him. Something had shifted within this land. The hollow man was gone, but the land had been marked, scarred by centuries of darkness. It would take more than just light to heal it. Still, for the first time since they arrived, Eli allowed himself a breath of relief. They had won. But as they turned to leave the clearing, a faint whisper, the last echo of the hollow man, floated through the wind. "It is never truly over." Eli froze, his heart skipping a beat. And for the first time, He wondered if the Hollow Man had truly been defeated, or if it was simply waiting for the next cycle. The whisper lingered in the air, faint but unmistakable. It echoed through the trees, curling around them like a memory that wouldn't die. It is never truly over. Eli froze, his breath catching in his throat. He could feel Sarah beside him, the unease radiating from her as she too heard the whisper. They both turned slowly, their eyes scanning the now peaceful forest around them. But there was no sign of the Hollow Man, no sign of the root. The trees swayed gently in the wind, and the sun filtered through the leaves, casting a soft light over the land. Yet the whisper had come from nowhere. The kind of eerie sound that clawed at the edges of sanity, sending a chill through your very soul. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked, her voice low, trembling. Eli nodded, his gaze darting between the trees. The air felt thick with something he couldn't place, something that had always been there, buried deep beneath the surface. He turned back to her, a grim expression settling on his face. "It's not over. It can't be. The Hollow Man's power, it was never just about him. This land, these woods, it's tied to something much older. Something more dangerous." Sarah's eyes widened as the full weight of his words sank in. "You mean, even though we killed it, the curse still remains? The land is still cursed?" Eli's jaw tightened. "Yes. It's tied to the land. Whatever happened here, it didn't just create the Hollow Man. It made the land itself a vessel for the fear, the suffering. As long as this place stands, the fear is still there. The curse has not been broken. The Hollow Man was just its most recent form. It could take another shape. Another monster could rise." Sarah took a step back, her breath shaky. "Then what do we do? We can't just leave this place to rot. What if something else comes next?" Eli didn't answer immediately. His mind was racing. He had seen evil, had faced down demons, ghosts, and creatures beyond comprehension. But this was something more insidious. A cycle that had been going on for centuries. "We destroyed the source," Eli said, his voice low but full of certainty. "We have to destroy the curse at its root." Sarah frowned, looking at him with confusion. "What do you mean? We already destroyed the Hollow Man's heart, didn't we?" Eli nodded. "We destroyed the Hollow Man's heart, but not the curse itself. The Hollow Man was just one symptom. We have to go deeper. There's more to this land than just that twisted creature. The curse, the darkness, is tied to something buried here. And that's where we need to go." He began walking toward the edge of the clearing, heading back into the forest. Sarah followed closely, her footsteps hesitant but steady. The world around them was still, too still. The trees stretched high, their branches thick with leaves, but the silence was suffocating. It wasn't the peace they had fought for. It was the kind of stillness that follows a storm when the damage has already been done. Eli reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the journal Sheriff Hawkins had given him. The pages were worn, the edges frayed from countless reads. He had combed through it after his conversation with Hawkins, trying to understand the depth of what had been plaguing this place. The journal spoke of ancient rites, forgotten rituals, and the land's dark past. But there was one entry that had stuck with him, a cryptic passage from Hawkins' father. "The land itself is the heart of the hollow. It was never just a creature that fed on fear. It is the soil, the trees, the very roots that stretch deep beneath us. They are the curse. They are the cycle. To sever it, you must dig deeper than the surface. To break the hollow's hold, you must destroy the roots themselves. Eli stopped in his tracks, his fingers shaking as he turned the pages. He found the passage, his eyes scanning it once more. It was clear now. He hadn't destroyed the curse. He had only put a temporary end to its latest form. But the heart of the curse was buried deeper, under layers of earth, old roots that had long since grown tangled with the land itself. "This is it," he muttered to himself. "The heart of the curse isn't just buried here, it's buried within the land. We need to dig deeper, find whatever was used to bind this curse. That's the only way to truly end it." Sarah stepped up beside him, her eyes wide with fear. "But where do we begin?" Eli scanned the forest around them. He could feel it now, the faint pulse beneath the earth, the sense of something alive, waiting, lurking. It was as if the land itself was a giant wound, and they were walking on the scar. "We have to go deeper," Eli said, pointing toward the old hill at the far side of the forest, the one that had loomed in the distance since they arrived. "That's where it all started. The land's center. We need to dig down there." They made their way toward the hill, the trees growing denser the further they went. The air thickened as they approached, the quiet heavy with an oppressive weight that made it hard to breathe. With each step, Eli could feel the presence of the hollow growing stronger in his bones, as if it were aware of them, watching, waiting. They reached the base of the hill, its slopes steep and tangled with thick vines and underbrush. As they climbed, Eli's eyes scanned the area. There was something about this place, something ancient. He didn't know what exactly, but he knew that this was where it had all started. Sarah was breathing heavily behind him, her movements slowing as they neared the top. "Eli," she whispered, her voice urgent. "Do you feel that?" Eli stopped, his heart skipping a beat. The ground beneath his feet had shifted. The vibrations were subtle at first, but now he could feel the thrum of something deep in the earth. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, but he knew that would never be an option. "I feel it," he said grimly. "Whatever is buried here, it's waking up." With a final push, they reached the top of the hill. At the crest, the earth had been disturbed, stones and debris scattered as if something had been dug up, torn open. And there, in the center, was an ancient stone circle, its edges worn with time. It was the remnants of a forgotten ritual, a seal placed here long ago to keep something locked away. Eli knelt down and began brushing away the dirt from around the stones. Beneath the surface, something gleamed, a dark, polished stone with runes etched into its surface. He could feel the power radiating from it, ancient and full of malice. "This is it," Eli whispered. "The heart of the curse." As his fingers traced the runes, the earth beneath them trembled once more. The stone began to glow, faint cracks spreading across its surface. And then, as if the land itself was rebelling, the ground began to shift violently beneath their feet. Eli's eyes widened. The hollow was awakening again. And this time, it was coming from within the very earth. But as the roots' tendrils surged toward them, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that this battle, this fight to destroy the land's heart, was only the beginning. The ground shook violently beneath Eli's feet, sending shockwaves through the air. The ancient stone's circle trembled as if the earth itself was being pulled from its very roots. Cracks spiderwebbed across the dark stone at the center of the ritual site, glowing faintly with a malevolent light. The pulse of power that had been dormant for so long was awakening. Eli's breath quickened. The air was thick with a sense of wrongness, the very land around them alive with dark energy. He could feel it now. The hollow was not just a monster. It was an ancient force tied to this land, to the earth beneath them. It was more than a creature. It was the land itself. Sarah stumbled back, her face pale, her breath shallow. Eli, this isn't just a curse. This is something older. Whatever this is, it's not just the Hollow Man anymore. Eli nodded grimly, his mind racing. The Hollow Man was only a manifestation of the curse. This is what's been here for centuries. The source of everything. The land's heart, the heart of the Hollow. The stone in front of them pulsed with dark energy, each beat sending a ripple through the earth. Eli could feel the presence of the Hollow, a consciousness beneath the surface of the land, a force that fed on terror and despair. But it wasn't just feeding anymore. It was awakening. The land was starting to reclaim itself, and the Hollow, the darkness that had gripped it for so long, was surging back to life. Sarah's voice broke through the panic rising in Eli's chest. We have to stop it. We have to destroy whatever is keeping it alive, Eli. Eli's eyes burned with determination. We destroy it from the inside. We have to sever its connection to the land, to the earth itself. If we don't, it will take over again. It will be unstoppable. But as he stepped forward, the ground beneath them split open with a deafening roar. The earth cracked wide, and from the depths of the fissure, something began to emerge. A shape, dark and writhing, its form made of twisted roots and shadow. It wasn't a creature anymore. It was the land itself, a mass of dark energy, pulsating, alive, and hungry. The air was thick with the stench of decay, the ground quaking beneath their feet as the creature's form grew, taking shape from the very earth itself. Its body was made of roots, stone, and shadow. Its face, if you could call it a face, twisted into a grotesque mask of fear and rage. Its hollow eyes gleamed with ancient malice. You think you can destroy me? The voice came from everywhere, echoing through the very earth beneath them. I am not a creature. I am the land. I am the fear that feeds it. You cannot kill me. I am the Hollow. Eli's blood ran cold. This wasn't just the Hollow Man. It was the Hollow in its purest form, the heart of the curse. It wasn't a being that could be slain with a blade or destroyed with a weapon. It was the very force that had bound this land for centuries, feeding off the terror of those trapped within it. But there was one thing Eli knew. Fear was the Hollow's greatest weapon, and the key to destroying it wasn't to fight it with violence. It was to fight it with the very thing that had always defied it. Hope. You're wrong, Eli said, his voice strong, rising above the oppressive hum of darkness. You are nothing but fear, and you can be destroyed. The Hollow's laughter echoed through the air, a hollow, bone-chilling sound that rattled Eli's bones. You think your words will save you? You cannot defy me. I have been here long before you, long before this land was even named. You are but a fleeting shadow in my eternity. Eli's grip tightened on his silver blade, its glow now pulsing with the energy of his defiance. Sarah stood beside him, her hand trembling, but her eyes were filled with that same fire that had burned within her before. Together, they could do this. "We're not afraid of you anymore," Sarah said, her voice low but unwavering. "We've seen the darkness. We've faced it. And we've fought it." Eli's eyes locked on the hollow's massive form, the pulse of dark energy surrounding it. He knew what had to be done. They had to sever its connection to the land itself. They had to destroy the core of its power, the very force that had bound it here. Eli stepped forward, the silver blade raised high. "We are not your servants. We will end you. You will not rise again." The hollow's tendrils lashed out, faster than Eli could react, and he felt the cold touch of its darkness wrap around him, pulling him toward the heart of its power. The very air around them seemed to close in, and the earth beneath them began to pulse with a deep, rhythmic beat, like the heartbeat of the land itself. Sarah shouted, her voice breaking through the noise of the hollow's laughter. "Eli, now!" Eli didn't hesitate. He plunged the blade into the ground, into the very core of the land. The moment the silver touched the earth, a burst of light erupted from the point of contact, bright and blinding, cutting through the darkness like a sword through smoke. The hollow screamed, its form contorting in agony as the light from the blade spread through the land, cutting through the roots, the stone, the very soul of the hollow. The land trembled violently, and for a moment, Eli thought it might collapse beneath them. But he didn't stop. The hollow's dark energy writhed and fought back, but it wasn't enough. The land had been broken, its power severed by the blade of light. The hollow's form began to disintegrate, the tendrils of darkness fading like smoke in the wind. The creature's scream echoed through the air one last time, a sound of pure rage, and then it was gone. The earth beneath their feet began to settle. The pulsing energy faded. The forest was still. Eli collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. His heart pounded in his chest, but the weight of the world that had pressed down on him for so long was finally lifting. The hollow was gone. The curse had been severed. Sarah stood beside him, her face pale but filled with relief. She reached out, her hand trembling as she touched his shoulder. "We did it. It's over. The land is free." Eli nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the now silent forest. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, the leaves rustling with a softness he hadn't heard before. The curse was gone. The hollow man was no more. The land was free. But as Eli looked out into the distance, a faint whisper drifted through the air, carried by the wind. "It is never truly over." And Eli knew, deep down, that while this battle was won, the scars of the hollow would always remain. There were places where the darkness still lingered, where the past could never truly be erased. But for now, they had broken the cycle, and the hollow was no more. For now. The end. Or was it? Eli's legs buckled as he collapsed onto the ground, the weight of exhaustion finally hitting him. He took a deep, shuddering breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the forest was quiet. There were no whispers, no echoes of unseen horrors, just the soft rustling of the trees in the wind. It was peaceful, almost serene. Sarah stood beside him, her face pale but filled with relief. She looked at the empty space where the hollow once stood, her chest rising and falling as if trying to convince herself that it was truly over. That the darkness had been purged. That the curse had been lifted from the land. But something in Eli's gut told him that peace was fleeting. Something unnatural lingered in the air, a quiet, simmering unease that hadn't quite dissipated. He couldn't explain it, but the sense that something wasn't right clawed at his insides. "Eli," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "It's over. It's finally over." Eli opened his eyes, looking up at her, but his heart wasn't at ease. He had seen too many things, too many battles, too many creatures, to believe that evil could simply vanish with the swing of a blade. The Hollow Man may have been destroyed, but the land, the curse, it ran deeper than any creature. It was in the bones of this place, etched into the very soil itself. "I don't think it's over," Eli murmured, his voice hollow. "Something's still here." Sarah frowned, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "It's gone, Eli. We ended it. It was buried, destroyed." Eli slowly stood, wiping the sweat from his forehead. His muscles were sore, but his instincts were sharp. He scanned the trees, the sky, and then the land beneath his feet. It felt empty, empty of the Hollow's presence, yes, but also something more. Something that was still waiting. He turned back to Sarah, his face grim. The Hollow was a creature of fear, yes. But fear doesn't just vanish. The curse, it's tied to this place. And I don't think this land is done with us yet. The wind picked up again, whipping through the trees, making them groan under the strain. The sun, once a comforting glow, now seemed distant, its light dimmer than before, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. And then it came. A whisper. This time, it wasn't the faint echo from before. It was clear. It was here, in the space between the trees, floating on the air like smoke. The same voice. The same presence. "You cannot escape me." Eli's heart skipped a beat. His stomach dropped. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth in disbelief. No, it can't be. But Eli already knew. He could feel it. The land had shifted again. The curse hadn't been broken. It was still alive. "The land isn't free," Eli whispered, his voice filled with dread. He turned, his eyes narrowing, scanning the edges of the trees. "It's never truly over." The ground beneath them trembled, sending a jolt of fear through their bodies. The roots of the trees began to stir, twitching like the tendrils of some great beast waking from slumber. The air, once still and quiet, was now filled with the unmistakable weight of dread, a shadow creeping in from all sides. "No," Sarah said, shaking her head, her voice trembling with fear. We destroyed it. We ended it." Eli took a step back, his hand gripping the hilt of his silver blade as the ground beneath their feet cracked, sending fragments of stone shooting into the air. "It's not over. The curse doesn't die with the Hollow. It was never just one creature. The land itself is cursed. This is bigger than we thought." Before they could react, the earth shifted beneath them. Something was rising, something from below. It wasn't the Hollow Man. It wasn't the root. It was something else entirely. The ground split open again, this time wider and deeper, the force of it sending a wave of air crashing against them. From the gaping chasm, tendrils of black stone and root-like vines began to emerge. They reached out like grasping hands, clawing their way into the open air. The darkness rippled like a living thing, and from it, the whispering began again. "You cannot destroy me." The voice rumbled, distorted, echoing through the land. Eli's eyes widened in shock. This wasn't just the hollow. It was a force of nature, a malevolent presence tied to the earth itself. The land had been corrupted by an ancient evil, a force that had fed on terror for generations, and now it was coming back stronger than ever. Sarah stepped forward, her body trembling. "What is it? What's happening?" Eli could barely get the words out as the reality of it sank in. The land is alive with the curse. The hollow was just a face, just a form. But this is what's been lurking underneath. The true heart of the curse. The root is not just a creature, it's a presence, a malevolent force tied to the very land itself. We've been fighting the wrong battle. The darkness seemed to pulse with a life of its own as more tendrils began to climb out of the earth, spreading across the clearing. A massive shadow began to form, a silhouette that grew ever larger as the darkness congealed into a solid shape. The creature, no, the force that had once been the hollow was not just the land's curse. It was something older. Something that had been there long before humanity had stepped foot on these lands. "You cannot end what is eternal." The voice boomed. "I am the land, I am the shadow in the trees, the darkness in the soil, and I will never die." Eli turned to Sarah, his eyes burning with determination. "We've made a mistake, Sarah. The hollow was only the start. We need to destroy everything. We have to sever the connection between this land and whatever is feeding it." But just as he spoke, the earth beneath them cracked open wider than before. The land was fighting back. Something deep below had been awakened, and now it was too late. The curse was coming back, stronger than ever. And Eli knew that their fight was far from over. The earth quaked beneath their feet as the darkness around them grew. The ground split open wider, jagged cracks running in every direction, pulling the very land apart as a massive, shadowy form emerged. From the deep chasm, roots like twisted veins spread outward, pulsing with dark energy. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the world seemed to hold its breath in the grip of something ancient, something primal. Eli's grip on his blade tightened, his knuckles white, but the weight of dread pressing down on him was suffocating. The hollow had been nothing more than a reflection, a symptom of something much older. The creature before them, born of the land itself, was the true heart of the curse. It wasn't a being of flesh and bone, it was a manifestation of the land's decay, a malevolent force that had lived for centuries, feeding on fear and darkness, its roots stretching deep into the earth. Sarah stood beside him, shaking but resolute. "What do we do, Eli? This thing, it's part of the land. We can't fight it with steel." Eli didn't answer immediately. He knew Sarah was right. The blade in his hand, though powerful, wasn't enough. The hollow's curse had been severed, yes, but this was different. This wasn't something that could be killed. It was alive, woven into the very fabric of the earth. "We need to sever its connection to this land," Eli said, his voice low but filled with a steady resolve. "This thing, the root, feeds on the fear and suffering of everyone it's ever consumed. It's tied to the land's very essence, to the earth itself. If we can destroy its core, sever the anchor keeping it alive, maybe we can finally end it." The land around them groaned, as if the earth itself were aware of their words, aware of their defiance. The tendrils of darkness slithered across the ground like massive snakes, wrapping around the trees and breaking the stone in their path. The force that had emerged from the chasm loomed over them, a mass of writhing roots and swirling darkness, the shape of a presence more than a physical form. Its face, if it could be called a face, was a grotesque mask of hollow eyes and jagged cracks, leaking black tendrils of energy into the air. "You cannot destroy me," the creature's voice echoed, reverberating through the earth. "I am the land. I was born from it, and it will feed me forever." Eli's heart pounded in his chest, but he stood firm. "You are the land, but you are also a disease, a blight. And no matter how deep your roots go, we will burn you out." As the last word left his mouth, the creature let out a thunderous roar, sending tremors through the earth, and the roots shot toward them, faster than Eli could react. But Sarah moved, raising her hand in a defiant gesture. Light flared from her palm, casting an aura of bright energy that pushed back against the encroaching darkness. It wasn't enough to destroy it, but it gave them a few precious seconds. "Eli, now!" Sarah shouted, her voice filled with desperation. Eli didn't hesitate. He charged forward, feeling the earth tremble beneath him with each step, the ground cracking and shuddering like it was alive. He knew where the heart of the curse was, the altar beneath the earth, the place where it all began. The root was connected to the land's center, buried deep beneath the earth, and the only way to destroy it was to sever the very connection between the creature and the soil. He plunged his blade into the ground, striking deep into the earth with all his strength. The world around them trembled as the silver blade connected with something ancient, something dark. The light flared once more, bursting outward in a blinding flash that cut through the earth itself. But as the light spread, the creature's form seemed to swell, its tendrils gripping tighter, pulling the very land closer to them. The light, though powerful, was only temporary. The root was deep, too deep, and the darkness pressed in on them, making the air thick with the smell of decay. "This is it!" Eli shouted, sweat pouring down his face as he forced the blade deeper into the ground. "We can't stop here. We have to destroy the core, before it consumes us." With a final, desperate cry, Eli pushed the blade forward, driving it into the heart of the earth itself. The ground beneath them cracked open wider than before, and the world seemed to shudder. The creature roared in fury, but as the blade plunged deeper, the earth began to change. The roots of the creature shriveled and began to fall away, the dark energy slowly fading as the light from the blade consumed the darkness. For a moment, the world stood still, and then the earth exploded. A blinding flash of light filled the air as the land itself tore apart, the very soil beneath them splintering as the hollow's heart was shattered. The roots pulled back, disintegrating into ash as the creature let out a final, agonizing scream that seemed to echo across the land, and then silence. Eli's eyes snapped open as the explosion of light faded, and he found himself lying on the ground, gasping for breath. The air was thick, but the oppressive weight of fear had lifted. The land around them was still, eerily still, as if the curse had been broken, finally and completely. The dark presence that had once filled the earth was gone. Sarah was beside him, her face pale, her body trembling, but her eyes were filled with something Eli hadn't seen before: relief, hope, We did it, Sarah whispered, her voice ragged. Eli pushed himself to his feet, his legs weak beneath him, and glanced around. The land had changed. The trees, once twisted and gnarled, now stood straight and tall, their branches stretching toward the sky as if they had been freed from a great weight. The air was still heavy, but it felt clean. He wiped his brow, breathing in the cool air. For now it's over. Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with concern. But will it stay that way? The curse, the land. Can it truly heal? Eli's gaze softened, though there was still a trace of wariness in his eyes. The curse was tied to the land, to the fear it fed on. We destroyed its heart, but the land will take time to heal. There may be scars left behind, but this, what we did, will keep it from coming back. He paused, looking out at the horizon where the land met the sky. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the earth. The hollow may have been destroyed, but Eli knew that the land would carry the marks of what had happened here. The scars would always remain, but it would heal, slowly but surely. We've stopped it, Eli said, his voice strong, though his thoughts were still clouded. But we'll always remember what happened here. And if it ever rises again. He didn't finish the sentence, but Sarah nodded, understanding his meaning. They would be ready. The hollow was gone. But in the distance, Eli could feel the faintest whisper, the smallest echo of what had once been. It was a warning. The battle might have ended, but the war for the soul of the land was never truly over. The end. Or is it?